Julia. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Playwright Center's Artist in Conversation. We begin, as always, by acknowledging that the Playwright Center sits on the traditional land of the Dakota people and the Anishinaabe Ojibwe people. We offer our gratitude for the work of Native and Indigenous artists, past, present, and future, who steward the land and challenge us to be partners rather than owners of it. I encourage all of you to learn more about the lands you find yourselves on by visiting native-land.ca. Now, this particular Artist in Conversation is hosted in partnership with the Dramatists Guild Foundation as part of their Row Green Visiting Voices program. For more information on the Dramatists Guild Foundation and all of their programs, visit dgf.org. Thank you so much for being here with us. My name, as Julia has mentioned, is Lynde Rosario. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm a dramaturg and the director of fellowship programs at Playwright Center. And with me today is a playwright who needs no introduction, but I'll do my best, Sarah Ruhl. And Sarah Ruhl, for those of you who may not know, is an award-winning American playwright, author, essayist, and professor. Her plays have been produced on Broadway and across the country, as well as internationally, and translated into 14 languages. She is the recipient of a Steinberg Distinguished Playwright Award and a MacArthur Genius Award Fellowship. She teaches at the Yale School of Drama and is currently Brooklyn-based. Sarah Ruhl, welcome to Playwright Center's Artists in Conversation.
Hi, it's so nice to be with you.
Thank you. Really wonderful to have you. And I know we sort of bandied about a number of different topics, but I'm so pleased that you wanted to talk today about connection and presence. That is something that I find incredibly meaningful. But I would love, of course, to hear your thoughts on theater as a vehicle for the meaningful connection and presence that we experience in today's world, in your experience.
Well, I guess it's something that's always just been intuitive to me that theater is a place for gathering, theater is a place for people who might otherwise feel like misfits or feel excluded in other ways, and as a place to come together. And I guess I was thinking about it a lot when the Surgeon General came out with a health advisory about loneliness in this country. And I thought, well, theater is a time-tested antidote for loneliness. And why are we not getting funding from the National Institute of Health rather than just from the NEA? I mean, it just seems like um, people post-COVID don't completely know how to be with each other. And I think that phones have made presence and connection more and more difficult. And theater is something that trains people to be present and connected with each other. And theater trains people to listen in a real way to each other. And I just feel like it couldn't be a more important art form right now.
As we find ourselves farther and farther away from the initial shock of the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm curious, this evolution of theater and theater making as it sort of straddles in a hybrid way the digital and live world. What are your thoughts on its current status?
Well, I think people are making really interesting work all over the country. I just think that funding is really hard right now, and a lot of theaters have shut, a lot of new play development programs have shut. There's been a kind of brain drain in terms of, uh, backstage folks, stage managers leaving New York, leaving the city, not being able to make a life in the theater. So I think it's hard. I think there are tough times institutionally and tough times for the artists making the art. So, I think we're coming back slowly. But I don't think we're out of the woods yet.
I'm curious, for those who are sort of coming into this world as a new theater maker, what advice would you give them, having sort of seen the evolution as you've described it?
I think it's the same advice no matter what. I mean, I think it's find your people, find your collaborators, find a way to be less lonely in the profession and to stay connected. Um, Find people who you want to make work with, and don't wait for an institution to give you power to make work, but go ahead and make your work, and and hope that the institutions will follow.
What has been some measures of success that you have found helpful in navigating this current world of theater, especially for those who maybe are not yet found their people?
I really love this book by Lewis Hyde called The Gift. For those of you who haven't read it, Lewis Hyde is a poet, but he's also kind of an anthropologist, an essayist, and he talks about, particularly with poetry, how poets function in what he calls a gift economy, and yet we're also situated in this capitalist economy. So he talks about, I mean, you asked about measures of success. So thinking about if you're not making a living, say in playwriting or in poetry or in the arts, how do you feel successful? And I think Lewis Hyde is someone I keep going back to because I think he just recalibrates um, the experience of being an artist in terms of setting your intention and trying to find intrinsic reasons to make the work that you're making, so that whether or not it finds a particular audience, whether or not you make money, you can feel like, okay, I was making a gift and the gift was received. Maybe I wrote it for my aunt. Maybe I wrote it for my teacher. Maybe I wrote it for myself. Maybe I wrote it for a past version of myself. Maybe I wrote it for a future version of myself. In any case, that the making of it, the process of it, had value.
Can you talk a little bit about the gifts offered and received that you've experienced in your career?
Well, one gift play I wrote was for my mother, who's an actress in Chicago. And for her 70th birthday, I wanted to write a play for her. And she grew up in Iowa and played Peter Pan in sort of the community theater in Davenport, Iowa. And I'd always seen her pictured in green tights flying around. And so I wrote a play for her called For Peter Pan on her 70th birthday. And she eventually played the role in Chicago at the Shattered Globe Theater. Uh, and I interviewed family members. I asked them 5 questions each. I asked them what they thought was wrong with this country, how they felt about their birth order, what they thought about the afterlife. What else did I ask them? A memory of Christmas. And then out of all of those answers, I kind of sculpted it's in a way, it's not a devised piece, um, but a research piece for people who are living, who I really care about. So then I vetted it with them and they all gave me notes on it. And their notes were all very different. And then I did, give it to my mother for her birthday.
That's beautiful, and also really exemplifies everything you were talking about, connection through theater, right? Making those connections to all of those folks. That sounds like an incredibly unique process. Is that something that you find you incorporate a lot into your other plays, or was that very specific to this play?
That was very specific. And I think normally I don't write plays that are specifically about living people in my family. And I felt like I wanted to be very careful about how I did it, so that it did feel like a gift, and it didn't feel like exploitation, and so that nothing was in it that was upsetting to my family. But I don't know that I would do it again. And I don't normally make plays that way.
How do you make plays?
It really depends. Some plays start just with an image. Like with the play Dead Man's Cell Phone, I just saw the image of a dead man at a table with a phone ringing and ringing. Sometimes they start with a voice speaking. Sometimes they start with a question that obsesses me that I can't get out of my head. Like with my play Melancholy Play, I just was really interested in the question of what happened to the category of melancholy when people talked about depression so much as opposed to melancholy as a category of emotion. Um, and sometimes they begin, yeah, from a little story that I've overheard about real people that then becomes fantastical.
That's exciting that there is so many different elements that you incorporate into your practice as a playwright. I'm curious, are there some that carry through always? Are there some elements to your practice that you're like, every play I write, it always includes this?
I mean, my kids make fun of me for my themes because they say there's always love and death. And I'm like, well, what else? What else is there really? So I think that those themes do repeat. I can't say in terms of process that there's anything that is always the same way. Although I will say that almost always I start at the beginning and right through to the end, which is maybe obvious, but I find that it's best for me, since theater moves through time, for me to start with the thread and then keep following it rather than writing out of sequence.
What was your process to finding your people in the journey of your career as a theater maker?
I think I was really lucky because I started out in Chicago, taking some classes at the Piven Theater Workshop in Chicago, which is a small, um, it started as a training school for actors, and then it had a theater attached to it too. And they commissioned my first play out of graduate school, which was an adaptation of Virginia Woolf's Orlando. And I was very young when I wrote it, but it gave me the experience of working with an ensemble. And I've worked with those folks over and over again. Polly Noonan, Jessica Thebus, Joyce Piven. And then after that, I think it was an experience of finding directors who I loved and just advocating to work with them over and over again. I mean, I think it's always good to find new people who are outside of your zone. But I think it's also worth advocating for people who you really connect with, because I think it's not a given that you'll really connect on an aesthetic level and a human level with a collaborator.
Who are those folks that aesthetically you find like those connections with?
Les Waters is someone I've worked with again and again, and he's directing Eurydice again at Signature Theater in New York this spring. I've worked a lot with Rebecca Teichman, Mark Wing Davey, um, and I think those that sort of handful, and Jessica Thebus in Chicago are the folks that I've worked with over and over again.
Were there ever moments, either in the pandemic or outside of it, that thing that you described earlier, that chronic loneliness or that feeling of absence from your people, like was there ever a moment in your life and career where you found theater was the thing that pulled you from that moment?
Um, I think always. I think I've always felt that way. Um, I think, I started as a poet, and I think being a poet is a pretty lonely proposition. Um, and so I think what I love about the theater is there's the solitary part of the writing, but then eventually you have to be with other people to make your play. And so you get both the meditative and the contemplative time, and then you get the time of chaos and exuberance and fun. It's really fun on a good day to make a play with other people.
I completely agree. And when you are without it for a long time, I also sort of feel that heartbreak of that. I'm curious, that lockdown moment, that quarantine moment for you, what was that like in terms of the disruption to a theater practice, or perhaps maybe more time? Some people found they had more time to write. I wonder what that was for you.
I ended up switching genres for a little while and really writing prose and poetry during that time. I wrote a book of haiku. I was writing one haiku a day. And I wrote a memoir called Smile, about my experience having facial paralysis after I gave birth to twins. And I couldn't seem to write a new play during that time. I mean, I was busy with my kids underfoot who were on Zoom school, and it's funny. I mean, you never really know whether your play will be produced. So you're always writing in a kind of vacuum of faith, hoping that your play will get put on. But there was something about the intense vacuum of COVID, of like really not knowing when your play would get put on, that I was not in the mood to write plays.
Was there ever an experience of the digital theater that was being made that inspired a release of that isolation, I suppose, or that connection and presence that we started talking about?
Mm, Well, I really admired something my former teacher and good friend Paula Vogel did, which is this initiative Bard at the Gate, where she was helping to produce and record Zoom theater, and she was specifically looking to shine light on plays that she thought should have had a production years ago and for whatever reason didn't. And that was really inspiring. And I was also working at the time with some other women on a publication called Three Views, because I was worried about the state of criticism and the American theater, and it seemed like a good time to help create that initiative. So I was working with the theater community, but just not on a new play.
What do you see the future of these initiatives being? It feels like there were a lot of things started, a lot of seeds planted at that time by folks who were eager to be in community and to have that connection. What do you see is sort of the next level of that?
I mean, I don't know where the digital stuff will go. Um, I don't know if the need for it is still there or if it will morph into some other art form. I do think I had sort of grander hopes that the pause would create massive think tanks talking about what kinds of reform we needed in the American theater, and then there'd be excitement and new companies who were created in that vacuum. And I didn't necessarily find that to be the case, and maybe that was just because everyone was fighting for their lives, health wise and economically. But I felt like theaters made some changes, larger institutional theaters made some changes, but they ultimately, to me, I felt like coming back to the theater after COVID, it felt like there was a lot of fear in institutional theater, and actually a lot of rushing to create product um, because of economic fear. So I didn't find that there were that many new models that I saw that had been created, but maybe they're all over the country, and it's just I live in New York and maybe I just wasn't seeing them here.
Were there models you were hoping to see? Were there things that you had high hopes that they would come about or manifest themselves, even aside from the talking that everyone was doing at that time, like the acting of it?
I've dreamed about starting a small theater company in Chicago that's based around just doing things in a very small way and not putting a lot of money on the stage in terms of set or costumes, but really paying the labor and paying everyone the same amount of money, and creating a sense of community through the making of a show. Um, and also just putting up a show when it's time to put up a show, like not on a particular schedule. Um, I think that I really long for more ensemble theaters. I think I mean, speaking of community, that's one way for an aesthetic to get created over time among people who really trust each other. And it's a way to remember that creating an aesthetic in the theater is more than a one-off product, like one show at a time, getting either lifted up in a season or castigated in a season, but really making work and evolving an aesthetic over time. And so many ensembles have gotten shut down.
What were some of your favorites? What were some groups that you were sad to see go?
um I was sad that the City Company ended. I've worked with Anne Bogart a lot. Actually, I forgot to mention Anne in terms of collaborators I've worked with over time. um and I've worked with Trinity Rep, which is still going, but I think it's harder and harder for them to pay their ensemble salary every year. Luckily, Steppenwolf is still going in Chicago. I always used to grow up going to Steppenwolf. Um, and people are still trucking along, but I just I feel like there's an energy for people in their 20s that is hard to, it's like lightning in a bottle, and I think it's great to see more ensembles come out of that.
For those who have maybe eclipsed their 20s, where do you believe sort of their their world of theater making, like where do you see those particular theater makers landing in this moment?
Yeah, that was so ageist of me to talk about 20-year-olds. Maybe it's because I teach at Yale School of Drama, and I see those graduates come out, and I long for them to be creating community. But I also was helping a little bit with this initiative called the Tent that Tim Sanford started, for playwrights sort of over a certain age. And I think there's been infighting among the group because some of them don't want to be called old necessarily, but really that's what the discussion is, that there is a prejudice against playwrights over the age of 60 in terms of getting productions, and the Tent was a collective form to shine light on those playwrights. And I do think it's true in the American theater that the press likes to kind of pick out shiny new writers and lift them up for like one or two productions, and then they sort of move on to the next. And so I do think in terms of duration, it's hard to sustain a life in the theater. And I don't feel that that's true like for novelists and poets in quite the same way. I'm seeing something in the chat, 60 plus season playwright. Seasoned is a good word. I like it.
Excellent. Yeah, no, and I just, because you've mentioned the chat, I'll just remind folks that if you have questions, we'll be sort of transitioning to a Q&A. And so please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to include your questions. But yeah, I'm curious, Sarah, speaking of questions, what questions do you have sort of for this next generation of theater makers who are coming in post-COVID, like coming from an age where the digital world is so present? And what questions do you have for them?
I mean, to be honest, like on my mind right now, so front of mind is the election. I'm sorry, I'm just getting over this endless cold. So I guess one question I have for art makers right now in general, young, old, in between, is if Trump wins the election, how will we carry on as artists? What will we feel the need to say and do if that happens?
Do you have any inclinations on how you will respond?
Uh, I think writers need to keep writing and speaking truth to power. But I'm very worried at the moment, and that's really top of mind right now. I hope, like, speaking of Minneapolis and Minnesota, that Tim Waltz can just save us all. I don't know if there are fans of Tim Waltz out there. Don't say that.
Oh, I'm sure there are many fans. You can see them all over Minnesota and beyond. Yeah, I'm curious in terms of artists responding to the current moment on all fronts, right? There are so many sort of conflated crises, you could say, that are all informing one another. I'm curious, does there seem a hopefulness, someone who works with this new generation of incoming theater makers, probably more than I do for sure?
Yes, hopefulness, absolutely. I mean, my students are brilliant. I mean, there's just a renaissance of new plays being written. They're brilliant. They're brilliant writers. They're brilliant makers. I think I'm not worried about them at all. At all.
Oh, that's so good to hear. That's good to know. I'm curious, are there other things that you're excited about for the future? Like, other than the new makers that you see coming up, are there things that you're working out in your writing that you're excited to sort of launch into the world?
Well, I think having started as a poet who then started writing plays, I've always been interested in language, and also in the moment of when just regular old words, when you put them in a certain order, seem to almost become a melody or seem to approach what music does. And so it's been interesting over the past couple of years. I found myself working on a lot of musicals and one opera. And I don't know if that's a sort of logical progression, that, I'm interested so much in the musicality of language, and then ultimately that I'd really love collaborating with musicians. So I'm working on a new musical based on a book called The Interestings by Meg Wolitzer. And Sarah Ruhl is doing the music. And we had our first workshop, and that's been a really a joy ride so far. It's been really exciting.
That is exciting. I can't wait to see what comes of that and get my tickets when they become available.
Yeah.
Great. I'd love to take this moment because we're about halfway through our conversation. Julie, do we have any questions from our folks? Okay, Julie says we have
One
a
moment.
bunch of questions. Thank you. They are coming soon. Well, I'm glad that we took this moment to pause because we want to make sure we get as many as possible. We have a lot of attendees with us today. So thank you so much again for joining us. Great. So while Julia is getting our first question prepared, Sarah, I'm curious, now that we know a little teaser about what's on the horizon for you, I'm curious what feels like is a next rest spot for you. It feels like we're always talking about what's next in our work lives, but are there things that you're looking forward to in terms of like places to visit now that our travel has opened up? Are there people you haven't seen in a while that you're hoping to reconnect with?
Such a beautiful question. No one has ever asked me that, ever. What are you looking for? How are you looking forward to resting? I love it. That's so beautiful. I always miss seeing my mom and sister in the Midwest. So I always use any excuse to go visit them. So, but I can't really say it's restful because I also have two plays in Chicago right now. So I'm going to go see them and see my family, but it still will feel restful to me to be with them. I recently went to the most beautiful retreat center in Ireland in West Cork called Zogchen Bara. I went for my 50th birthday as sort of a present to myself, not on my birthday, but like a month later. Um, it is the most beautiful place. It's like a Tibetan monastery, but in a totally different landscape. Just looking out at the Irish Sea, and you can see whales sometimes if you look out. And they have meditation classes and a retreat center that's very it's really not too expensive. I mean, it's expensive to get there, like to fly to Ireland, but once you're there, it's not too bad. I really recommend it. I had such a nice time there, and I would love to go back there one day.
Oh, that sounds beautiful. Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, and thanks for the recommendation. We'll definitely be checking that out. And Julia has dropped a bunch of questions that I will scroll up and find for us here. Oh, excellent. If you were to revisit a play, for example, if you were adapting it to another form, are there any stories or characters you would want to revisit or develop further?
Yeah, maybe. Sorry, has anyone else had this 14-day cough that I'm experiencing? Um, I made Eurydice into an opera a couple of years ago at the Met, and it was really interesting to vault those characters into song. And I can't say that I changed my view of any of them or anything like that, but it was really interesting just to think, oh, yeah, Eurydice is a soprano, and obviously Big Stone is you know, a tenor, and just to voice them was really interesting to me. And the way the composer melodicized and rhythmicized their language was fascinating to me. And it did make me feel like the concerns of the play, the grief in the play really belonged to other people at that point. Like I'd really given it away. Um, and I'm just seeing one thing in the chat that I just do want to respond to from Allie
Oh, please.
about Bell's palsy. And I just want to say, sending you some healing thoughts. It can be very hard and very isolating. So thank you. Thank you for that in the chat.
Of course. Yeah. And because, I mean, we've sort of spouted around the term isolation and loneliness a bit. There's a question here. Have you ever benefited from loneliness as a writer? And if so, how?
I mean, I do think it's an essential ingredient in its way. Um, you face yourself in solitude in a way that it's really essential for a writer to do. It can be painful, but I do think you have to do it. Um, I remember, so my husband is from Los Angeles and he was training at UCLA for his medical residency, and I really didn't want to go there. But I followed him for love after graduate school when I was 26. I was so lonely. I had two friends. One friend, Beth Henley, I met at the MacArthur, and one friend, Julia Cho, I met at Hedgebrook. And great friends to have, but really I had two friends. That's it. And Tony was constantly at the hospital. And I just wrote. I wrote for 4 years. And it helped me develop a body of work. So it was not fun. That loneliness was not fun to push up against. Um, and I don't recommend it in huge doses, but I do think you have to face it down at some point to write.
Thank you. A question in the chat: how can a seasoned playwright be more visible? They write, "We love to mentor, but we also make our own work." Do you have any advice?
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, I think theaters need a real shove about this. Um, they need a shove. Um, I mean, I think continuing to shove theaters about this issue and advocate is important. I also think forming writers groups of like-minded people who are maybe facing the same struggles is helpful. I mean, it doesn't necessarily give you visibility in the broader world, but at least you can take some comfort in the group. Um, I think joining things like the tent, creating ensembles, uh, and just persevering, just persisting. And it's I remember reading Gloria Steinem's Life on the Road. I was working on a movie about Gloria Steinem and read this book. So I really recommend. It's a wonderful book, but she was talking about the signing of the Declaration of Independence, where Native Americans were present, which a lot of people don't know that they were present, the Iroquois during the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And at one point they said, "Where are the women? And where are the elders? Why aren't they here?" Like if we were signing our own constitution, obviously you'd have the elders and you'd have women. So I do think there's something about our culture that's very ageist, and I think it goes back to capitalism and how we value workers and how we value or don't value workers over time. And definitely it's in the theater world. um, and I think for women, it can be especially rough, for actresses, especially rough. And I think if you can make it through a certain swath of middle years, you can come out at the end and be like a wise old crone. But you have to be patient. It's hard.
I completely agree. And actually the thing that you said also, where are the elders, where are the women? A question here: what challenges have you faced in a male dominated theater world?
Hmm. I mean, I think I faced challenges from things like male artistic directors not understanding a play because they don't understand the point of view. Um, like literally, they don't understand how to follow the story because they're following like a side character male point of view and not the woman at the center of it. I've had that happen. I think sometimes I've had problems with male critics not understanding point of view in a play. I will say I've been also really lucky. I've been really lucky in the American theater, and I've been really lucky that I've been able to write women at the center of plays and find homes for them and find people who do understand them. So it's a mixed bag. I think that the non-for-profit world, in my experience, is better for women, then I think the commercial world is still a disaster uh, for women theater artists. But I think the non-for-profit world has made some really good changes. And there's so many more women artistic directors that I think that will keep getting amplified.
We certainly hope so. I know the Playwright Center has a new woman artistic director as well. So we're all staying very positive there. Sarah Ruhl play has a strong sense of voice and aesthetic. And there's a question here. What were the building blocks that informed your voice, especially early on in your career? And do you have any advice for especially emerging playwrights working to discover their voice and aesthetic?
I do. My voice advice is to not think about your voice. Don't think about it. Just keep writing. Your voice is your voice. It will emerge. I really think it's detrimental to look in the mirror too much when you're writing, as it were, or navel gaze, or think about, is this playing my voice? Is that playing my voice? It's all your voice because you wrote it all. So I don't mean to be Pollyannish or simplistic about it, but I really would just say keep writing, and it's for other people to characterize what you're doing. You don't have to characterize what you're doing. You just have to keep writing.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. And there's a question here in the chat more about your process, more day to day. What is your writing practice? Do you outline? What do you do when you're struggling with a play?
I never outline. I hate outlines. I find them so boring, and they bore me such that I would never start to write a play if I was looking at an outline. Like if I saw that scene two had to do a particular thing, I would just be like, oh, I'm not writing it. Because I really like to discover and surprise myself as I go and kind of organically discover. So for me, it's about hearing a character's voice and then following the voice. It's just like follow, follow, follow. It's like you get the strand and you keep pulling it and you keep following it. Um, when I have troubles, oh, and when do I write? I write between like 10 a.m. and noon. That's the best time for me. I mean, I used to write late at night, but when I had kids, it was just like, no. So the kids go to school. I have some strong tea. I write a little bit, and I try to do meetings in the afternoons, so that that first rush of clarity isn't taken away. And then when I have troubles, um, I really like to walk away from the canvas for a while. Like a painter kind of might stand a painting against the wall and just step back from it for the afternoon or for a minute or for a while, and then come back to it.
Excellent. And have you ever had a wonderful experience with a dramaturg? Do you have advice for new dramaturgs from a playwright's perspective?
I have. I really love this dramaturg, Janice Perrin, who I've worked with at the MacArthur. She's very gentle. She asks really good questions. Um, she really sees structure. She's not sort of overbearing. And she's really good if you need cuts. She's really good at saying, I think you said that before. Do you need that line? Which sometimes is hard for a writer to see. Also, one of my favorite dramaturgs, Madeline Oldham from Berkeley Rep. One time I was doing this play, Becky Nurse of Salem, at Berkeley Rep, and we had a really hard dress rehearsal. It was one of those sort of disasters where like things fell from the sky and people couldn't remember their lines. And it was just like, what is happening? And Madeline had invited a local witch from Berkeley to kind of talk to us. And it just happened to be right after the dress. And this local witch kind of had us all look in the four directions and set our intentions. And then the preview was great. It was like the best turnaround from dress to first preview I've ever seen in my life. And I was like, only Madeline Oldham would have thought to bring a local witch. Amazing. And so part of what I draw from that is a dramaturg knowing very specifically what a particular play needs and what a particular playwright might need.
Excellent. Wonderful. And I love to hear that as a dramaturg myself. A question here, how does it feel to watch the plays you've written be performed? And do you have a favorite play of yours to watch?
Um, I don't think I have a favorite play to watch. I mean, I think plays are sort of like children where you don't like to play favorites. Um, the question was, do I have a how do I watch?
What is your experience of watching your work performed?
Um, I mean, it can be rapturous, it can be really nerve-wracking. I guess I would say that when I most love watching my work, it's before the audience comes. I love rehearsals. I love working with actors. I love watching them find something. I mean, I love the first time that something coheres and kind of lifts off. What I don't love is just the anxiety when the audience first comes and you're like, is it working? Um, and when, you know, the press comes and all that, I find that extremely stressful. Um, but I love being in a process. That's my favorite kind of watching.
Mine too. Wonderful. That's so exciting to hear. I will also just lift up a question here. How do you envision truly equitable theater? How can we have an equitable theater while obviously COVID is still a thing that we all contend with? And I know you had sort of mentioned your dream theater in Chicago and the ensembles that inspire you. What is your take on equity in theater?
I mean, I think that the National Institute of Health should just give us a ton of money and then we should salary the artists. Um, because that's one inequity in theater is that the administrative staff sometimes gets a salary, but the artists coming through don't, and in a way, it was always thus, like theater people have always been kind of living on the edge in certain ways. But I mean, it would be great if the government could give us more money. The NEA never will. So that's why I have this crazy idea about the National Institute of Health. Um, because yeah, we do need money to get more equity. And commercial theater is not a place to get more equity, even though that's where some of the money is. So I'm just trying to think of creative ways to get more money, to get more equity. Because unfortunately, things like um, longer rehearsal time or 5 days of rehearsal a week, it all costs money. So I feel like the theaters tried to institute some of these little reforms, even things like paying artists for like labor that maybe 4 years ago you would have done for free. So they try to pay you now. And I think that's great. But again, they need to raise money for that. So I will say, I do think you could have a lot less money on the stage in terms of set. And Playwrights Horizons has an initiative coming up that I think is really interesting, where they're specifically trying to develop some new work where there's very little money spent on the set and it's mostly spent on the actors. And I think that really interests me as a form of equity.
That is really exciting. I hadn't heard of that initiative. Something that kind of goes hand in hand with equity for me is also accessibility. And there's a question here. Do you feel accessibility is getting more presence or care or acknowledgement in this day and age than it had maybe pre-COVID?
Um, it's my experience that people are thinking about it more. Um, yeah, I mean, both in terms of physical spaces, representation, um, things like ASL being offered or incorporated. Um, I feel yes, I feel it's a little better.
Do you find that the digital world helps us in this way create more accessibility? I know I can see now how many more theater productions are streaming or making things available to people late after their performances. What are your thoughts on that level of accessibility, like capturing or streaming live theater?
I think it's great because, just thinking of accessibility more broadly, I mean, there's the difficulty of getting to the theater, the economics of getting to the theater and travel. And there's also people with chronic illness who um, can't leave the house for a variety of reasons, or too tired to leave the house, or have long COVID, or have, any number of reasons where it's hard to leave the house. So I think it's fantastic. And I think equity shouldn't block that from continuing, because I think it helps the art form and helps people engage, and helps people stay connected.
Uh, Early on, did you ever struggle with the feeling like you were not doing enough to push your career or to stay connected to the theater community?
Um, yeah, I mean, I spoke a little bit about this sort of generative time where I was out in California, and I felt very far away from some of the things going on the East Coast. And I did feel isolated, but it was good for me. I mean, I think it was actually the right thing for me to have time to develop and to write, rather than being kind of racing around and doing a ton of readings, or racing around and trying to get an agent. Um, I think I think there really is this yin yang about the life of any creative person, but a playwright in particular, where again you need this quiet, this solitude to make the thing, and then you need a little hustle. Um, and you need to meet the people who are making the plays. But I don't know. I always think there are two kinds of playwrights. There are those who start sort of as poets, who are really mostly focused on the writing, and then they have to push themselves to kind of go to parties and meet all the people and do all the things. And then they're the playwrights who start as actors, who love going to the parties and love meeting the people, but have to force themselves to stay home and write. Um, but I find that that duality really interesting.
That's very exciting. And I know you, of course, have a life as a professor and an educator. I'm curious, and there are a couple of questions in the chat. I'll try and condense them about balancing your life as a writer of your own generative work and being an educator and a professor. And of course, this wonderful question, what is the greatest lesson you've learned from your students?
Hmm. I've learned so many lessons from my students. In fact, I'm working on a book right now that will come out this May, a collection of essays called Lessons from My Teachers. And I do consider my students my teachers also. But it's sort of a portrait of teachers from preschool to the present, based on a class I teach at Yale called Lessons from My Teachers. You asked first how I balance the teaching. I mean, I think I try to just be disciplined about um, teaching when I'm teaching, and making my work when I'm not teaching. And that doesn't mean I'm not constantly writing recommendation letters, or, being willing to offer mentorship or a phone call if it's needed. But I try to respect my teaching day. Um, and then, yeah, what lessons have I learned from students? I mean, I had an extraordinary student, an undergraduate named Max Ritvo, who was a poet, who took a playwriting class of mine. And we wrote letters back and forth, because after fall semester, he was diagnosed with a pediatric cancer, a Ewing sarcoma. And he died when he was 25. And Max taught me innumerable lessons about writing, about how to write in the face of mortality, about um, being demonstrative, not waiting to tell people how you feel about them. Um, and I really recommend his poetry. Speaking of Minneapolis, he was published by Milkweed Editions, really great press. And some of you might already know his poetry, but there's great wisdom in it.
Thank you for sharing that. I do know Milkweed, and they are incredible publishers.
Yeah.
And there's a question in here about the power of theater, and something that you've just sort of shared evoked that in me as well. So the question is, what power does theater have, and how might theater makers think about their art as powerful and what it can achieve?
I think you just do not know the ripples, that the way that the ripples of meaning that go outward. You can't quantify it. You can't know it. Um, and I feel like whoever asked the question is, how do you know that your work is powerful? How can you channel the power of the work?
How can theater makers know the power that their plays can achieve?
I feel like whoever asked that question already knows it. And that's why they asked it. Like, there's power in your work. Um, it's a powerful thing to move people. It's a powerful thing to help people laugh at the human condition. It's a powerful thing to get them to get out of their seats and come to the theater in the first place and gather. So just thinking about political organizing, um, theater people are political organizers. They get people to come to a place and sit down and turn their phones off for 2. I mean, that's a miracle in this day and age. No one can get people to do that, but theater makers do. It's an enormous power.
I agree. And this question, I'm going to keep us on time here too. So maybe one or two more. But this question here, what gives you hope for the future of your own writing, for the future of playwriting, theater?
I mean, I go back to my students in terms of hope for the future. I mean, just extraordinary writers. Um, I there's a Carlotta Festival at Yale in the spring, and I see such beautiful plays that are written in community and for community, um, with such diversity of life experience and aesthetic, and such a powerful need to tell story, and that really gives me hope. Um, hope for my own writing. Uh, who knows? Who knows? But the practice of it is hopeful. Just continuing to practice, I think is a hopeful thing.
I completely agree. And with that, we'll bring us to our final question. And I understand we didn't get to everyone's questions. There were many, many, and so we got to as many as we could. This last one I think is a really generous one. How do you find ways to give back or pay it forward as a theater artist when you've been afforded opportunities? Do you have advice on best practices to give to your community when money isn't an option?
Mm. I mean, time is a big thing to give to people. So you know, if a young playwright or an emerging playwright asks you for a phone call or a coffee, I think that's a wonderful way to pay it forward. If maybe money isn't an option, but you can somehow get a young artist in to get a free ticket to your play or to the theater in general, I think that's a wonderful way to make a connection. I remember several professors doing that for me when I was starting out, and my not even knowing. I mean, I remember somehow I met Chuck Mee. I think he let me into Brown's playwriting program, and he had to play at Lincoln Center. And I remember sort of naively asking him if I could get a ticket to come see it. And he said, oh, absolutely. And he got me a ticket. Now that I'm older and have been produced there, I kind of think it wasn't a comp. I kind of think Chuck bought me the ticket. But who knows? Maybe he said there's a student who wants a ticket. Can you please get her a free ticket? So that kind of advocacy. I do actually think it's a very generous field. I really do. I think theater people are extraordinary and they can be extraordinarily generous with their time. Um, and, and their money. So if you don't have the money yourself, you can poke other people. You can be an advocate to try to get grants from other institutions. And I think that we don't, speaking for myself, but I don't think money is how most of us got into the theater. Um, I think we many of us got into the theater for precisely the kind of intangible joy of sort of gathering backstage with other people, the magic of that, the magic of being in this little society, this little temporary society together. Um, and that's free. That is, you can do that for free if you can find a space to do it in. So I think things like offering to let young writers into your circle, in whatever way, to come to your home, to come to your writers group, to listen to them, um, and to agree with them when they say it feels really hard. It feels like I'm never going to get a production. And to say, yes, I felt that way too. Like I remember the time when I had the 14th rejection from Eurydice and I thought no one will ever do my play. It's just not going to happen. I've had 13 readings of it and no one will ever do it. And, weeping on the kitchen floor. I don't know a playwright who hasn't gone through that. And so reminding people coming up that yes, it does feel impossible at the beginning, but there's a way through.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I completely agree. And what a hopeful statement to sort of end this amazing night on. Thank you so much for this gift of your time, which I'm sure is, not easily accessible at this point in your journey as an artist in your career. And so I just want to say again, it has been such a delight and a joy to share this space with you. And to have so many people here with us and to be able to release this later digitally. We will all be releasing this digitally, and so you can watch it on demand from your homes. And something that you said earlier about sort of the gifts that we give. It's incredible to note here also, in case for those of you who maybe haven't heard this before, that the Playwright Center supports over 2,500 playwrights each year. We've
Wow.
been able to do this, yeah, and this is mostly through the constant help and support of our communities. And so it's incredible to have you now as one of our many, many alums of this particular series, but also to welcome you into our community here, Sarah. Thank you.
I love what you all do at the Playwright Center. I mean, it's really incredible. And I was a resident advisor like years ago for a summer program that the Playwright Center put on. I met an extraordinary young playwright, Christina Anderson, who was in high school and who had a play at the Playwright Center called Confessions of a Black Diva. Christina was 16 years old and she performed it. So I have known about the work you all do for a long time. It's really incredible. So I'm delighted to be in dialogue with you all. And I'm sorry for my coughing and my it's and I just, yeah, I wish you all well. I wish everybody really well.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you. And yes, as I've said, we have been able to do exactly as Sarah said, sort of support all of the playwrights in our circles with the help of you, our community. I do hope that you will consider making a gift to the Playwright Center. And if you wish to do so, you can do so at pwcenter.org/donate. And on behalf of those 2,500 plus playwrights and myself and Sarah Ruhl, and everyone else at the Dramatists Guild Foundation, thank you so much for joining us and have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.
Thank you.